Excellent. Welcome everyone. We're going to get started. My name is Raven Ortolan-Wiesman. I am a senior career advisor at the Career Center in Creighton's campus, and I work a lot with arts and science and nursing students. And I'm going to real briefly let Heather introduce herself as well, since she's presenting with me.
Hi there, it's good to see some of your names pop up. I miss all of you. Business students know I work predominantly with the business students or any student entering the business field as well with any major, and happy to join today.
Great. So as far as some fun logistics that we're going to have happen, Heather and I are going to be covering some slides specific to job searching in a pandemic. We'll also have some information that's going to be general job searching regardless of whether you're in a pandemic. And we do have some time specifically for questions. I think given that we have a number of people on, we're going to have you just send those questions as they come up via chat. We have two other advisors on with us, Seth Kleinwort and Caitlin Feldman, and they will both be able to address questions via chat actively while Heather and I are talking. But then also when we have Q&A breaks, we can have them let us know what questions came up perhaps more frequently. And so I think we're gonna
Raven, I think you're cutting out when you speak a little bit, so I just want to clarify. Yeah, we'll touch on Q&A as we see those come in. So we'll have breaks where we'll kind of pause and address those questions. Sorry, Raven, I just didn't know if it came through because your face paused for a moment.
No, I appreciate that. And Heather and I will be doing this back and forth. If one of us does cut out, the other can take over.
Perfect.
Great. Okay. So as far as the agenda, we're going to first talk about COVID-19, how it's impacting today's economy, what trends we're seeing, strategies we recommend. We'll then have a Q&A break, and then we're going to talk about the general job search fundamentals, what's both applicable across pandemic, non-pandemic searching, and then what are some specific COVID-19 pandemic strategies for job searchers, and we'll end with Q&A. And before we dive into those strategies, just a quick moment to frame some of the things that we're talking about, especially for those of us who like to compare to others. We may see other people who have job offers already or who perhaps aren't as impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic, and we may feel like we're behind because we don't have that same level of success. But just keep in mind that no matter whether we're in a pandemic or not, there is so much that goes into success, and job searching in general is a complicated endeavor. And for every success
Raven, you're cutting out here.
Okay. Do you want to take over for me?
Yeah, maybe just in case. Of course, you guys are probably experiencing a lot of internet issues as you're on your various Zoom calls. Yeah, I think with this slide, we mainly just want to set the standard of this slide is applicable outside of the pandemic, and that job searches are hard, especially as you look around and have a comparison. And really, a lot of what you see on the surface with your peers is kind of that top of the iceberg, whereas even the ones who've gotten to their goal experienced all that stuff beneath the surface, and that's just part of that process that we'll talk about today. And Raven, we can try to have you jump in on the next slide if I believe you've got the next one. Actually, it's me. We can just jump over. Well, basically, just to kind of preface everything, the Career Center has been trying to follow as much as possible in terms that you can imagine every day we're getting new insights. We have a professional organization called the National Association of Colleges and Employers. That's kind of who we follow. Handshake's another one that, in my opinion, Handshake's probably doing the best job right now of staying on top of things, putting content out. I pulled a couple stats to kind of frame our conversation from what Handshake's put out. I know it says March 2020, but that was at the end of the month. Probably the most recent, really legitimate survey we've seen come out. So just wanted to touch on a few of the relevant pieces from that survey. And, you know, I think they've got a great perspective because they have a monopoly on the Career Center field. So they basically have the perspective of all college students around the country, employers trying to recruit those entry-level candidates, and then also the Career Center. So it kind of accumulates all of those perspectives. You've been reading this slide, I'm sure. The big takeaway here, if you haven't already sort of had that realization that we need to shift our focus to the online virtual reality that's happening now, that's a critical need. So what we're going to focus on later is really how to be effective virtually with your job search. If we go to the next slide, this one talks about sort of where employers are at with whether they're planning on hiring less, more, evaluating. This is changing every day, by the way, and I have a few new stats to bring in actually, but according to this report, I really have two takeaways from this when I look at it. One, a lot of uncertainty still. I mean, that 54% still evaluating tells you companies are still just trying to get their ducks in a row and figure out what's going on for themselves. So if you're experiencing uncertainty, know that that's happening on both ends and we're all kind of in that together. Secondly, there is hope for hiring. You look at that 23% that don't plan to make any changes, 4% hiring more. Maybe a lot of that 54% will actually maintain some of their hiring. So if I'm going to have one takeaway today, it's that we need to be realistic with some of the potential negative impacts of this job search, but also have a lot of hope. The survey I learned of today was from NACE, which is our professional organization that I mentioned. They're actually doing some data now, realizing that maybe the media is hyping things up in such a way that's more negative than the reality and causing people to panic about the job search, especially college grads more than needed. They just did a survey this past week that had over 250 employers. Of those employers, only 15% have canceled their internships. I know that doesn't impact you, but it kind of gives you a sense of where those employers are at with the juniors. And then 2% have rescinded full-time offers. So a relatively small fraction, because a lot of the layoffs and job cuts we're hearing about on the media are really focused on not necessarily those entry-level college graduate jobs. So again, realistic but hopeful is sort of the tone I want to set with this slide. If we jump to the next one, oh, that's actually going to be Raven. Raven, we'll see how you do. I'll let you know if you're cutting out.
Well, so initial impressions, did you hear what I just said?
Yes.
Okay, well, that's a start. So this is similar. We have information here from the National Associations of Colleges and Employers, and we're looking at their survey data. What's nice is that they've been surveying every Friday, and they're posting those surveys. So I have a link here at the bottom of the slide. The information from this quick survey is then from April 10th, so not too long ago, although it is still always changing. We see that their feedback, their information from the survey is similar to what Handshake is saying. So nice that we're seeing some consistency across these different bodies. Looking at the 234 surveyed employers, 64% not revoking any offers, so that was including internships and full-time. 22% are considering revoking internships and or full-time, but only 2%, the same that Handshake came up with, are actively revoking full-time offers. And then speaking about where they're going and how they think that trend is going to change or not change, about 2/3 of those employers that were surveyed are not going to change their recruiting strategies this upcoming season.
Perfect.
And here, in a pandemic, one thing that happens, as we're seeing, is people come together to help in every way they can. One of the ways they're doing that is compiling information. So we have some of the favorite resources the Career Center has been using to try to ascertain who's hiring. The first is candor.co, and I hope everyone can see that on my slide. That is a great resource. It's 100% user shared. And so people are saying that they've heard of companies that are either actively hiring, have freezes, have layoffs, and that list is live.
Yeah, you cut out a little bit, but I think you hit the main point. It's just a live feed, real-time sort of users crowdsourcing to kind of update. Have they been laid off? Has their offer been rescinded? Are they still hiring, et cetera?
Yeah.
We can hear you now.
Okay, fantastic. And if you, even like, there's 1,000 companies by the time I got to the C's, so that's a big list. It also has resources like webinars if you want to get your resume or have a recruiter talk about resume updating. It has more even than just that live updating. Stillhiring.io also crowdsources data on who's hiring. That has more of a search feature. There's not as many companies listed, but I like that for every company. It connects you to what types of jobs are being offered right now for those different companies. The Muse, that's a list of 71 different organizations, again, with connections to jobs that are actively hiring, so a nice resource. Handshake, we've already talked about it. They've been a fantastic resource in a lot of ways. They have 500 companies that are actively hiring that you can look at via Handshake, which of course we all have accounts on Handshake. And then there are some things like top entry-level employers that we use even outside of the pandemic. So this is a just nice general list of companies that typically hire students outside of their undergraduate degree. So again, this isn't connected to COVID-19, but a good place to start. And then I would say be proactive. We have here a hashtag that you can use on LinkedIn to see of places that are hiring, but also I know that Candor has a Twitter account, and if you're following them, they are tweeting active updates to their list. So, we can be smart consumers of technology to really help us stay up to date with this information. Anything else on this slide, Heather, that you wanted to talk about?
No, I think we'll touch on the fact that we'll have some links on our website soon that will direct you to these. I know someone just asked if we could share a link during this, and we can continue to share specific links to the chat if needed, and we can also share out these slides after the presentation.
Absolutely. We can even have them perhaps posted on our website if that makes sense, or email them out. We'll figure out how to disseminate that information to you. And now really looking at what does the COVID-19 economy look like? It's not too much of a surprise to us that the organizations most heavily impacted are those that involve discretionary spending or non-essential organizations, airlines, hospitality, entertainment. We're seeing those hit the hardest, and we've seen that in Omaha. Two organizations that have a nice presence in Omaha, one being Sojourn, which is a company that deals with travel data, and then also we see Toast, which is an organization that helps with software at restaurants. Both of those organizations had to lay off close to 50% of their Omaha workforce, so it's hitting us here at home too. So if there were industries that you were really excited about that were in the heavily impacted areas, now is not a good time to look to get hired there. Not saying that no one's hiring, but it's certainly going to be a lot harder at the moment, right? This isn't forever. But there are organizations and industries right now that are thriving. And so we see here a list of ones that make sense that we've seen some growth in. One shout out to the federal government. They actually have a site dedicated to jobs that have opened in the federal government in connection to COVID-19. So we can share that link too, but it's usajobs.gov/coronavirus. And they're actually also making the process to get hired easier, because under normal circumstances, it's actually a little bit arduous to get hired by the government. It's a long process, so that's getting shortened. And I think, Heather, did you have some specific companies you wanted to call out on this slide?
I mean, yeah, if you look at some of the articles of who's hiring, they really fall under these categories. I mean, under healthcare and pharma and things like that, we've got CVS and other both online and in-person healthcare providers. Financial services, I know, for example, Charles Schwab is a big hirer, and with their acquisition of TD, I think that connection to Omaha applicants would be strong. Obviously, some of the ones on this list are not the kind of jobs you're applying for. Like, I don't think you want to go work at a grocery on the front lines, but I'm sure even some of their corporate sites in grocery and streaming and all of those will be hiring. So that's, I mean, I've really seen the companies that are hiring kind of fall in these categories. That's been consistent. And the other thing, we mentioned federal government. I would certainly check out state government websites as well. We haven't been following the specifics of that in terms of each state, but that would be something to look at. And maybe you hadn't thought about government before this time.
Right. And remembering government covers almost every different industry that we could be interested in. With some of my individual appointments with students recently, we've been looking at state sites and been impressed by the amount of job offerings that there have been. So I would absolutely second that that's a good place to look. I have a note saying my internet connection is unstable.
Yeah, you're cutting out just a little bit, but it's okay.
Okay, and there's not much to say on this particular slide, but really
this is just a slide, I know Raven's probably talking, but this is a slide that kind of summarizes what Candor was tracking in terms of who's hiring, who's not, and it's just a more visual reflection of, the green being who's actively decline in their workforce. So it's a good summary slide to kind of reiterate what we just talked about. And we are about to do a Q&A break, so especially if you've got, we're going to do more slides before that, but if you've got questions about industries, we can dive into that soon. We can go ahead and transition to that next slide with another stat from Handshake, unless you had something to add there, Raven, because I think you're back.
No, you covered it. Thank you.
Perfect. Kind of backing up to that Handshake slide, because transitioning to the topic of what does this mean for candidates. So this is sort of a no-duh slide, I guess. Everything's moving online. So this is what employers are stressing about right now. We're stressing about how to interact with students online, but employers are figuring out how to interact with you guys online through, you know, the obvious things like interviewing virtually via Zoom, phone screens being more prevalent, and then even hosting virtual events. We'll talk in a moment about how there'll be more virtual job fairs and other things to plug into since they don't have that opportunity to meet with candidates face to face. But that'll be a lot of the second half of our presentation is how do you meet these employers where they're at digitally. The next slide is sort of my transitionary slide about the economy. And this is probably where I'm getting the most questions. It is completely normal that seniors are reaching out to me saying, Heather, you have a crystal ball. What's going to happen with the economy? Because we want to know that, right? Unfortunately, I don't completely know. The best economists, including Ernie Goss and the Heider College of Business, still don't know what's going to happen. But I think the majority of people online are looking to that 2009 Great Recession for basically learning lessons and what we might be able to expect. So we've linked to a great article there. It was actually written by a millennial kind of giving a pep talk, so to speak, to Gen Z. And I fall in this camp. I graduated in 2008. 2009 were the people right under me who kind of hit the same wall during their job search. One of the biggest things in the article was about how sort of the hopeful piece is if you look at millennials now, young mid-30s, they are very successful. They have long-term meaningful career paths at this point. You know, during those turbulent early 20s, they picked up, there was some stress, right? But they picked up really great skills that are now really helping them long-term, which are things like resilience, resourcefulness when they had to dip into that gig economy and get creative, and adaptability. All three of those skills are highly coveted work skills. So, you know, 2020 is easier to look at those than when you're going through them, but those are skills that millennials look back at as really valuable. The reality that the article talks about too, and that we'll talk about on the next slide, is for those candidates who can't maybe find that perfect full-time entry-level role, the traditional role they were really expecting, there might be a little bit more job hopping in the next couple of years. There might be doing some gig or freelance work to try to get the experience and income that you need. But the beauty there is a wide range of experience. So millennials were really able, and I want to go up. Jumping between companies in your 20s kind of can increase your salary as you make those jumps, which can be an advantage. And I mean, for those of you who've had any experience learning about the time value of money, there's a similar concept here in terms of time is on your side. You know, this really, I foresee having only an impact on the next couple of years in your 20s, knowing this is very temporary and that you can still build to a very meaningful career is an important mindset to keep in mind. This is not going to destroy your career. And I know that can feel like that for some students that are worried about going into the economy right now. I don't know if you had anything to add on this one, Raven, but this is just a good segue to some of our job search strategies on the next slide.
No, I think you covered it wonderfully.
Okay, perfect. Well, the next slide, and then we will jump into Q&A, talks about creative job searching. Keep in mind, a lot of you are still going to be able to do traditional job searching and hopefully look for that role that you were looking for anyway pre-COVID, but this is some more creative strategies in terms of what I like to say is you're going to have a multi-prong job search strategy anyway. You're not just going to be trying one thing. You're going to be trying a lot of things, and this can be just one prong or a backup in your search. Students maybe have or have not heard of the term third-party staffing firms. Think headhunter. So a lot of students will choose to actually work with one or more staffing agencies. The role of that firm is to help match you as a candidate with employers who are seeking candidates. So they're sort of a matchmaker. Doesn't cost you money. The company pays for the hire. I've listed here some examples of national big brands like Robert Half, for example, has presence around the country in K-Force. But locally, there might be other options. So in Omaha, we would have a really great familiarity with that. But wherever you're looking, feel free to connect with us. We can kind of help you vet and figure out what's a good staffing agency in Denver, Chicago, et cetera. I say, why not connect with one of those, especially if you're kind of hitting a wall in your traditional job search. Secondly, we've brought up the notion of small jobs, gigs, think freelance. I alluded to that earlier. That may become your primary source of income initially. You know, I think if you have 2 or 3 months where you're not necessarily having success with the traditional search, you know, worst case, there are so many. I listed 4, but there's probably 20 different websites that have gig or short-term or remote opportunities. And these have already existed pre-COVID, but they're just going to be increasing in terms of the number of jobs populating on these. Some students will even choose to do these on the side. So maybe you get a first full-time role, but it's not the best pay that you wanted or the best experience you were hoping for. So these can kind of help you build that side hustle, either income and or experience as you go into this first year of your career. We will see some students look at paid internships, so we've included a few of those links. That's already something that exists in some industries, where as a graduate, you would, it's not beneath a college grad, so to speak, to do an internship in, say, advertising or sports marketing. And we'll just probably see more of that, where college grads will be open to a paid internship with a company, especially if there's maybe some assurance that that could convert to a full-time after the temporary internship. So I would certainly be open to that option. The final thing listed on this slide is Handshake blogs, just as a reminder that I think I mentioned earlier, Handshake's probably doing the very best job right now of putting out really timely, relevant resources for students. So I would check that out to help you think creatively. One of the things they're even doing is doing an Ask Me Anything hour with volunteer career advisors who are live and volunteering to be available. Of course, I hope you're going to use us. We're here too, right? But we will, you know, talk about our office at the very end. We have to do our plug, but certainly feel free to leverage Handshake as well. The only other thing I wanted to mention in the creative space was, and I'm telling the juniors this too, who might be facing a lack of internship over the summer, how can you build your skill set to be strong in an upcoming recession? So right now, for example, there's universities and third-party sites offering their content for free to learn technical skills and other online skills. Take advantage of that, especially if you have kind of a lull before starting a full-time role. What are some skills you can fill in on your resume and obtain for free? And maybe you finish out your semester first before you focus on that, but that's just something to keep in mind. You know, how can you really ramp up that resume while you're looking for that job? I keep saying our Q&A break is coming, but we still have one more slide. Yeah. I keep lying to you over and over again. We have one more slide I'm going to hit on.
And then Heather, can you hear me? Could I add one thing here?
Yeah, absolutely. We can hear you.
Okay, so one thing I've been talking about with some students, depending on what industry you were going into. So if I had perhaps like a journalism student and I know that there's not as many opportunities that I wanted, it's okay. You're not settling if you have a job that's outside of your industry of interest, but think about how you can actively, as Heather said, work at developing your resume in your industry of interest while you're perhaps working for a year or two in a job that wasn't your first choice, but is still a good step forward. So we're not settling if we're being creative, or we're being creative not only with how we job search, but perhaps how that initial entry into our career looks like. And I would just have you continue to be active in volunteering or in doing that online research or online development alongside that job.
You froze, but we got most of it. Thank you for that. Some of you on the call might be in this situation. I've had a few seniors, but not many, frankly. We're seeing this more in the internship space than the full-time space. You know, we do empathize if this is the situation you're in. It's incredibly stressful. It's not going to be much different for you, I guess, than students actively searching for the first time now. Obviously, we'll be reopening our search, using some of these creative strategies along with the other strategies we'll talk about today for your job search. But I would also be diligent about keeping in touch with that employer that maybe had to rescind that offer along with previous employers. Maybe in 3 months, if you're still on their radar, there's going to be that opportunity with them if you keep in touch with them. So, you know, trying to stay positive and network and follow some of the advice we talk about today will be the go forward. If you're in this situation, if you haven't already, I would absolutely meet with the career advisor. Webinars are great, but you know, the magic really happens when we chat with you one-on-one, and we can maybe discern specific strategies for you, connect you with specific contacts. The other thing we have highlighted here is practicing your interviewing skills. So, you know, if you're back on that job search, freshening back up, and then also being ready for the digital interviewing that we'll talk about in a little bit here. On the bottom, we've got a link to Wake Forest's website. They've probably done the best job in my mind of summarizing, you know, given a certain scenario you might be in, what are some strategies, and it's a good summary of what we've talked today on the webinar. So, you know, feel free to check out their website as well. They address steps you can take if you've had an offer frozen or rescinded. We're talking about those as well today, though. We are going to pause and do Q&A break, and I guess we'll ask Caitlin, Seth, if you've had any common questions for the greater good, you can chime in and we could maybe address those in a large group. And otherwise, you know, feel free. I don't know if we have that big of a group where if someone wants to chime in, I'm okay with that, Raven, or you can type those in the chat box right now. We'll also have a Q&A at the very end if you want to just start thinking about questions.
Yeah, I think it's fine if there's not too many of us that we would get overwhelmed to. If someone wants to unmute themselves to ask a question, I think we should be just fine.
This is Seth. As of right now, we haven't had any questions for the greater good. They've just been looking for those resources and the specific links. So I think the students would definitely love to get these slides at some point.
Perfect. Yeah, we can take a moment if anyone wants to think, and feel free to unmute and ask. We can pause for a moment here.
And this is Caitlin. Just as people are thinking of questions, we did have Jeremy Fisher, the director of the Career Center, pop onto the call. So Jeremy, is there anything that you'd like to share as they're thinking of questions?
Sorry, I had to unmute. I actually just got off. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. I actually just got off another webinar with career services directors, leaders around the country, and they were talking about, they had a couple of employers on the call. They had a few, career services directors who are, some of the top in our industry, talk about the next 3 to 6 months, at least what we know and what we're expecting. And nationally right now, I think employers, the statistic that was thrown out was only 15% are rescinding offers right now. I think if anything, the majority of them are in a wait and see approach. So this is not, at least in the short term, not going to be as bad as what we sharing as many of those valuable resources in terms of who's hiring, about opportunities for remote work, and as gig jobs, things like that in the meantime. And I'm sure I missed the first part of the presentation, so if you talked about this, I apologize. I had to join late from a webinar, but the importance of skill development in the meantime while you are job searching is going to be critical. So I talked to a student on Monday who I think is on this webinar. We talked about, learning, a skill set in data analytics for like Python or SQL or other programs, things that you might not have had a class in that would be valuable to add, that are in a high demand for employers, I think will be really important right now.
Absolutely. Okay.
Jill Zamol, that's okay?
Yeah.
So I am wondering about reaching out to potential contacts for networking. With everything that has gone on now, I'm wondering how different the strategies should be. I don't want to, basically, I think my concern is I don't want to reach out and be negligent about what the situation is. I don't want to basically use a contact at the wrong time in a way that isn't actually going to be helpful, if that makes any sense. Just looking at strategies for how that should be approached now.
Well, and I can touch on it, Raven, because it'll come up. We're going to dive into, I'll address it now, but actually we'll have a couple slides about networking and summarize what we'll say later. We're pro networking right now. I think some people are obviously much busier, but frankly, a lot of people working from home may actually have more time to jump on a call since they're kind of in the flexibility of their home working. And, worst case, just like the regular world, they'll ignore you if they're busy, but if they're able to help, great. We could work with on the specific situation, though. I know it could be touchy depending on who the contact is and whether the timing is right. But generally speaking, we would say forge ahead with networking right now. It's sort of your job to make yourself known during this job search. Did you have anything to add, Raven?
No, and can you hear me? I feel like you can't hear me.
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. And Jill, I know because I've worked with Jill, so we're also talking about the entertainment industry, perhaps in LA, right?
That's my signal for lagging internet.
Yeah, but I can't see the lagging signal because it's lagging for me.
Well, Jill, we will touch on networking, and then at the end, we can circle back. And it sounds like you might have been working with Raven. So I would say chatting specifically on the scenario would be helpful as well.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Any others for now? Otherwise, our next half is really going to be on job search strategies and especially pertinent to the new environment. And Raven, I will jump in if we have a question from.
Hi, I'm Vivian. I was just wondering because I applied for an internship uh, like 2 weeks post-corona or pre-corona,
Mhm.
and they said that they would get back to me in a couple weeks, but obviously the situation's changed. I was wondering like how to reach out to them and be like, hey, still interested type thing, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I've had a lot of students ask that question, honestly, and because their timelines, they're in that wait and see mode, right? And sometimes when employers are in wait and see, if they don't have much to share, they don't really share at all, unfortunately. So I would say following up is great. It's nice to obviously not have a tone of impatience or expecting a response. I think showing a lot of empathy is important right now. So maybe just, well, first of all, reintroducing yourself and acclimating them to who you were. You know, we interviewed in mid-March, and then showing empathy for the situation. I understand things are probably uncertain on your end, and that timelines and situation might change. Just wanted to touch base to let you know that I'm still very interested in the opportunity, and look forward to hearing back from you. And we could certainly help craft that a little bit more specific, but just kind of waving your hand saying I'm still here, still interested, and just showing empathy and self-awareness on your part for what the reason they're obviously probably not getting back. And yeah, I think you're moving now, Ravens, if you had anything to add.
Okay, great. So I reiterate everything Heather just said for reaching out to job searchers. What I was going to say for Jill, if you can hear me, was that if you were looking at entertainment, I think in LA, and I think perhaps including some language when you reach out, saying something along the lines of, I understand that right now things aren't moving forward, so I'm using this time for research. I would love some intel on, what your experience is like in the LA world. So letting them know you're not looking for things right now because it's not moving. But having that context, I think, would still be a great segue into reaching out. And
Raven, you're really cutting out. I do apologize.
Okay.
Okay, we'll circle back.
Yeah.
Raven, do you want to do the next slide, or do you want me to do the next slide? I don't want to take it from you, but I'm a little worried about connection. Let me know.
I can start.
Okay, I'll let you know if you come out of internet connection.
Okay. So in the job search, it's very important to be organized. Many of other job hunters aren't going to be as organized. So if you want to give yourself a leg up, have all of your ducks in order. So we talk about keeping your house in order. By that, we mean having your resume, of course, up to date. Also updating your LinkedIn and your Handshake. I know Heather will talk a little bit later about some key pieces to keep some key fields in Handshake and LinkedIn to have updated. But we're also going to develop and maintain a routine.
And you're cutting out again, Raven, sorry.
I'm gonna let you take over then, I'm sorry.
I can jump in.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, I'll talk about Handshake and LinkedIn in a little bit. Resume is the obvious piece. We're also a really good asset for cover letters, which should really be tailored to those roles. That can be a great competitive advantage when applying. Having a reference list ready, and you maybe know this, but making sure those references are aware that you're going to be using them and have approved that, and just having those people aware in advance so you're not scrounging to kind of get references and have their permission. The next bullet talks about developing a daily routine. I think even us professionals working are trying to establish this, like, showering in the morning and getting dressed. And I think Sophie mentioned earlier, she has a coffee and then she says goodbye to her parents and sits at her table. What's going to be your routine? What are the hours in the day you're going to carve out for job searching? And frankly, I'd recommend this even in the normal world. I think I've had students say they spend 4 hours on a Sunday job searching, and maybe they go to a certain spot, and now we can't go to Starbucks, so maybe that's a certain part of your house, or maybe the porch if you're not in our snowstorm today in Omaha. So just any kind of routine is just motivating, and makes you work on this when you've established that you want to work on this type of work. We talked about having your house in order, and that includes social networking pages. I would say even this is sort of a no-brainer, but I look at those Facebook, Twitter, and other personal accounts to make sure they're private. Make sure your voicemail sounds professional. In fact, recruiters prefer to hear your voice saying, "Hi, you've reached the number of Heather Doring," as opposed to a robot. Make sure your voicemail box isn't full, right? If they want to leave a voicemail, it's really frustrating if they can't because it's full. I get it. I don't listen to voicemails, and I let mine get full, but trying to be cognizant of that now, and answering your phone. If you've put yourself out there and they're trying to reach you, you want to be responsive to both the phone and then email as well. We're going to talk on the next slide about actually tracking opportunities with the system, which there's a lot of templates out there. I have a template as well. If you wanted me to shoot an example of a business student that created one, this is a good resource with a link to it. Not only the jobs you're applying for, but networking contacts, when you've last contacted them, keeping even a tab about next steps. You know, what's the next date and task that's on your radar for this person, so you are always pushing those leads forward. It's kind of like a sales funnel where you want to be pushing leads towards the close in this process. Anything to add there? It looks like you're moving here, Raven.
Okay. Well, I think also we already referenced sometimes you're going to apply for a job and not hear from them for weeks. So this also helps make sure that you are staying on top of it. So part of the job search is not applying and then saying, well, they didn't get back to me. Oh, well, it's actively reaching back out and saying, I applied to a job 2 weeks ago. I haven't heard back and I wanted to reiterate my interest and let me know if you need any additional information. And also don't be afraid to reach out to anyone in the Career Center for contacts. Know if there are recruiters for those companies you've applied at that you could reach back out to. So I think part of this is keeping track, but also challenging you to be proactive and continuing to connect with these places. I'm going to keep going. Maybe I actually have some ability to present. We also want to talk about the fact that a lot of the resources Heather and I have shared thus far have been about this open job market. And so
you're cutting out again, Raven.
Okay.
I can touch on, you did great that last slide. We had a consistent whole slide going there. Some of you have heard of this before. I think I've hit on this in presentations. I know at least with students I've worked with. The open job market is more of that passive side where you're finding jobs on LinkedIn, you're applying, we're crossing our fingers and hoping that you're one of 200 or maybe 2,000 that get the call back, when really this shows where the reality is that students get their jobs and referrals from. Networking is huge. I mean, we overuse that word, but for a reason. It's ultimately how a lot of people get leads, get a referral to actually get an interview. It's all about getting that interview, right? And then once you're in the interview phase, it's usually based on merit and how well you present yourself. Internal refers to actually, I think, internal references, but even recruiters. Usually you'd have the opportunity to go to career fairs or events in our office or even on-campus interviews. Being in the face really of recruiters, and now it's the virtual face, is incredibly important just so they might take that second look. If I'm a recruiter and a student reaches out to me via email and says, hey, I just applied for X position, quickly, here's why I'm enthusiastic about your company and role, look forward to hearing from you, I now might be taking a look at that person's application, whereas that student might have gotten hidden in the pile before. And certainly I'm probably forgetting stuff you were going to hit on this, but generally speaking, our goal is get out of that open market into the hidden market.
Yeah, I think you did a great job of covering that information. Everything else is on this slide. So here we have some specific strategies for how to break into that hidden market. And a lot of it is easier than maybe you had thought about it. One of the first things is just talking to people about your search. And we have in that Venn diagram, some key areas you can reach out to. Of course, your family, your friends, but also alumni. Like we're talking about social networking too. And then talking to your staff and your faculty contacts at Creighton University, asking them what they know about the area of interest that you have, but then also very importantly, asking for referrals. And we're not asking for jobs, we're looking for intel. We just want to learn more about what people's search project processes were like, and we want to learn more about industries.
We got most of it.
Okay. So, and then also don't be afraid to conduct informational interviews. Actually reach out to people and ask if you can spend 10, 15 minutes learning about what their job entails, maybe what advice they have for someone who's entering into that field. And it might not be exactly your area of interest, but maybe it's the location. So if I'm going to Chicago and that's where I want to work, maybe it's more like financial services. I was more interested in marketing, but they can talk about what their experience was like getting a job in Chicago. And that too is going to be helpful for me. Right, so I guess, Heather, do you have any other things you would want to say on this slide?
We can move.
Okay.
We'll move on. And some people are going to be familiar with the next slide, but I want to drill in because we'll talk about several resources to figure out what this networking looks like. And I guess let me preface, when I mention networking to students, usually students shake their heads and nod, but ultimately there's question marks going on. You know, how do I find these people you talk of? How do I reach out? Does it feel like I'm using them? That seems awkward. That seems aggressive. So I wanted to actually articulate this process to show you how normal and not awkward this can be. And also, I think I had one of my fellow coworkers bring this up one time, and it really resonated. Imagine you're 30 years old, and a 22-year-old reaches out to you and says they want to be just like you and want to talk for 10 minutes. How would you feel? I'm guessing if you're not a mean person, you'd be excited. Your ego would be on fire, and you'd be happy to do it if you're available. So just think that's their perspective. So this is not a bad thing. So what I have up here, and I have a link at the top, is our LinkedIn alumni tool. Probably the most powerful resource, hence why I'm going to dive into this one specifically. In this case, we have someone looking in the Minneapolis area for a human resources type of role. What you can do is basically on the bottom, any candidate will populate there. We have 35,000 alumni approximately on LinkedIn. It looks like this search pulled 103 alumni specifically. And when you find someone that you're excited about, you know, you can either reach out directly on LinkedIn. I have a good example here of how to add a message so that you give them some context about why you're reaching out. And you're basically, to make it very clear, not asking for a job. We're asking for an informational interview, okay? We want to hear their perspective as it might be able to help you in your job search. And what I want to reiterate there is, you know, worst case at minimum, if their company's not hiring or if they don't have a lot they can help you with, at least you can learn from their perspective. They might be able to give you advice about, you know, given your goal 5 to 10 years from now, what would be some good entry level roles to gain experience? What are the good companies in town? What are the companies people don't like? And, you know, at minimum, maybe asking to dip into their network. They, again, may not be able to help you directly, but a way to close that call can be, you know, is there anyone in your network, given what you've learned about me today, that might be helpful that you could refer me to? And now you're expanding your network just a little bit more. Better case scenario, maybe you are applying at their company and they can give you some insights about interview process, the company culture. The perfect ideal outcome would be a referral. Oftentimes they'll offer to do that because they're happy to, and they may even be incentivized to refer people. And that can really increase your chances of getting an interview. But I do want you to treat these all like gold, even if they don't seem like they could lead to a job. They're ultimately going to help you make a fraction of a step forward. The next slide shows what I would say is maybe an even better approach, and that is emailing the alums directly. So if you find someone on LinkedIn, there's a couple ways you can try to figure out their contact information. We'll talk in a moment about some resources on our website where you can look up email addresses, but also feel free to email a career advisor. We can look up our alumni database and figure out maybe what their contact information is. And here would be an example of how to email the same contact, but via email. Quick, to the point, asking for an informational interview. And again, treating that like gold. And what I will say is feel free to get one of us to review your draft. I think this is basically the most scary part for most students. How do I draft the email, right? It seems easy, but you don't want to mess it up in your mind, right? So we're happy to look at a draft, give you our impression, and that could be a great way to start with us. Okay. And then, you know, to dive a little bit deeper into the virtual networking, because, you know, when you're networking, of course, you also want to make a great impression. That's how you can get the outcome you want. Briefly, on the left-hand side, I'll touch on what we have here for Handshake. So coming back to that idea of having your house in order, I don't know if all of you know this, but you can actually be proactively reached out to by recruiters on Handshake. They can find you and reach out to you, assuming you've made your profile public. So in addition to completely filling out your profile on Handshake, there is a study that just came out really reiterating the importance of also updating your My Interests section, which is in a similar place as updating your profile with things like the job types you're interested in, the locations you're willing to move to, the job role. 80% more likely to get contacted by a recruiter if you update these fields. If you haven't done that, that's an easy thing to do. Similarly, hopefully you'll update your LinkedIn profile. Research shows with LinkedIn, there's kind of the big three. That is your photo, so having a photo that kind of represents the brand you want to put out depending on the industry you're applying for, having a headline, which is the quick text beneath your name, hopefully forward facing in terms of what kind of major you are or what type of industry you're interested in, so recruiters can get a quick snap of who you are as a candidate, and then the summary, which is like the about me, or I always say the abbreviated cover letter, so that you kind of give recruiters an idea of where you're headed. So make sure and add those on LinkedIn if you haven't already. And again, we're happy to kind of critique those. I'm going to walk through these other bullet points as well as other talking pieces. So Creighton already had our spring career fair, so we're not really having a big virtual fair, at least this semester, but there are others going around in the country. I put a website up here where there's actually free virtual fairs. I went on there and noticed some are hosted by specific employers that are doing a big hiring push. Others are targeted to certain populations. For example, there was a few on there for students with disabilities. So you might check out virtual job fairs. I don't know a lot about how fruitful those. Reach out to recruiters is something I already hit on. At minimum, guys, wherever you're applying, I want you to try to figure out who a recruiter is and introduce yourself after you apply. And that would be, you might call their HR department to figure out who the appropriate recruiter is, or especially if you applied in Handshake, email me or one of your other career advisors to ask who the recruiter is, because we can often look that up in Handshake on the back end. So, do be that person that's the go-getter in terms of contacting recruiters. Finally, I want to sort of hit on these last bullets, which in my mind are ways to make a good impression when networking. When you set up these calls, how are you going to maximize those calls? So, researching the actual company and professional is critically important, and bringing questions. So I would say that the biggest mistake we get feedback from alumni when a student reaches out is that students maybe expect the alumni to run the meeting. You've called the meeting, so there is sort of an expectation that you come with questions and have a lot of curiosity and interest. Now, they may take over and dominate, and then you become a great listener and let them steer if they want to go that way, but certainly come prepared with some questions just in case they're looking at you to lead that meeting. Probably the most important bullet is to bring a positive attitude. And by the way, this is really hard when you're discouraged during a job search. If you have a lot of discouragement or stress, talk with me or another career advisor first. Get all the crazy out with us, okay? Because I can hear those emotions, but when you're talking to those prospects basically and contacts, I want them to get positive vibes, enthusiasm, passion for the industry. And I think curiosity is probably the most appealing trait that a student can really reveal in terms of asking good questions, like you're genuinely interested in that person and that company. And then having your resume ready. They may ask you about your background and qualifications to sort of like an interview, although you're going to be a little bit more casual. I'd be ready to talk about some of your highlights and strengths if those come up. Lastly, and you've heard this before, surely, do send a thank you, going back to the fact that you're treating every contact like gold. I think an email thank you is perfectly suitable in this environment. Sending just a quick follow-up, and really, even if they didn't help you, treat it as if you're planting a seed. You never know how that's going to come back. I've had, I don't know how many students say that a phone call came back 6 months to a year later with something great. You just never know, and you really want to show that gratitude piece. Anything you wanted to add on this slide, Raven?
No, I think you've covered it.
Cool. And I think we're going to transition now to just some really more specific tips about virtual interviewing.
Yes, and if if you want to learn more about virtual interviewing, I have a video that's posted on the job search or the students tab of the Creighton Career Center website that you can look at, so we can dive in deeper. But some basic tips when you're doing interviewing remotely, I would say be prepared. That's one of the advantages. When we say create a checklist, and by the way, this is from The Balance, and The Balance is a fantastic resource for job searchers. But when we say create a checklist, that's looking at the actual job that you're looking at, thinking about the strengths you have specific to that job, and having that list of strengths next to you so you can remind yourself during the interview, help that inspire some of the interview answers you have about why you would be a good fit. Regardless of whether it's Zoom or whether it's phone, clear that room of distractions. And if you have roommates who also have things going on, try to coordinate things as well as you can. Please do reschedule if you know that for whatever reason there's going to be a distraction on that date. I would rather have you reschedule than take the first date that recruiter offers and then it ends up being a bad fit. I would also have you turn off call waiting or any apps that might notify you during the call so that you can focus. And I would also have you smile. Can you hear me still?
Yes.
Okay, lovely. I would also have you smile during that as you're talking, because we actually do show some energy in our voice. And so if you're smiling, that's a great way to communicate your enthusiasm to the recruiter or whoever you're talking to. And lastly, have your resume in clear view to also reinforce some of the strengths that you have for that position. When we're Zooming or having video interviews, it's similar. Hopefully your internet connection's better than mine today. One of the pieces too is rescheduling if you need to, because perhaps someone else in your house needs to use Zoom or some sort of streaming service at that same time. Reschedule so you know you're getting the best bandwidth possible during that interview. Also look at the camera. I think you've noticed Heather and I have been doing that a lot during this presentation. That's looking the viewer in the eye. And also try to minimize your hand movements. I actually move my hands a lot, but I try not to have them move in front of the camera because that can stutter the screen. We also don't know what's going to happen. I mean, life is crazy bananas.
You're cutting out.
Leave. Can you hear me?
Now I can.
You may have to leave during that interview, so do dress completely for whatever you have going on. You don't anticipate the future, and also it instills you with confidence.
She's cutting out. I think she's implying don't wear the purple underwear. I've been admittedly wearing pajama pants most days, but I wore dress pants for you guys today, just in case, to follow the advice here. Sophie sent in a good question about what you recommend wearing for dress if we're not able to bring any of our professional clothing home with us. I mean, this is just going off the cuff. I would say wear at least business casual if possible. If you're able to go into a Walmart and get a quick blazer, keeping social distancing in mind, great. There might be some stores available still with something good enough, so to speak. But I certainly think you could break the ice with that. I'm home, wasn't able to bring clothes, but so happy I was still able to connect with you for an interview. I don't know. Raven, you might have other advice, but that's certainly a good point.
Yeah, and can you hear me?
Yeah.
So the other thing too, if you can have like a nice solid colored black or gray sweater or like a cardigan, that can go a long way as well. So I'd say perhaps having a solid colored t-shirt, a solid colored cardigan over that.
Cutting out again, but I'm with you on cardigans. Even if you have to use your mom's cardigan. May not be the most stylish, but we're gonna work with what we have, and we're not going for stylish. We're going for as formal as you're able to do. If you have specific questions, I have had students send me pictures of their attire and say, what do you think? We can be that casual, happy to kind of give feedback on clothing too.
And then the last piece, if you can hear me, is to do a mock interview, and we can not only tell you in real time what it looks like, but also evaluate your background to say, yes, that looks great, or, that's kind of distracting, or, hey, Zoom isn't working. Well, how can you fix it between now and your interview?
Yeah, okay. All right, we're taking this home with the next slide, really with a mindset summary. So on the one hand, job searching is a numbers game. We definitely want you to be applying in quantity, but I am always a pro quality approach over quantity. So keep applying, but do be targeted in your approach. So I cannot hit home enough about targeting every resume and cover letter, minimally your cover letter, hopefully even resume with keywords from the job. Networking, which means you're really maxing out that lead, like we like to call it. So whatever you can do to try to increase your chances of getting an interview when applying is huge. I would much rather you apply to 15 to 20 places and hit this networking and targeted approach hard than what I often hear from students is, hey, I've already applied to 130 jobs. No one's gotten back to me. And honestly, which of those is more efficient as well? So try to stick to that targeted but constant approach. Regular reevaluations is incredibly important, I think, even for your sanity. The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results, right? So throughout that process and in a very nimble fashion, you have to ask yourself, and it's sort of like being a detective. Am I applying but not getting any interviews? Or maybe I'm getting interviews, but I seem to be getting second place every time. Or maybe you've even gotten some feedback about your interviews. So kind of understanding quickly maybe where you're not progressing in the process and adjusting. Also maybe realizing, gosh, I may need to pull out some of those creative strategies. These traditional jobs I was looking at aren't getting back. Maybe I need to look at a gig or a different industry to kind of reevaluate. And it is helpful to meet with a career advisor. We're sort of a unbiased third party who could point out a blind spot for you and maybe come up with new ideas you haven't thought about. It says think outside the box. Also consider your bottom line. It may be worth taking that non-dream job to get the bottom line money you need during this time, not the end of the world like we talked about, and maybe making that budget if you haven't already to figure out what's your bare minimum, and maybe you can make that money doing just a job and you can still search on the side, but that's something to be considerate of. We've hit being proactive over the head, but I want to reiterate it one more time. Even in normal circumstances, a good job search is a proactive search. So actively applying in a way that you're networking at every place you're applying, and also networking beyond where you're applying. So again, in that hidden market, some of the best opportunities come from actually talking to people who may not even be hiring, and then you hear about opportunities through them. It's sort of diving deeper into different layers of your network, and really making and organizing goals for that. Every week, maybe on a Sunday night, you create a list of your tasks for the week, what you can do to progress every day forward on that job search, just as if you had a big project due for school. And organizing that can help you feel control. I think a lot of stress comes from feeling a lack of control. So the more you can control and organize that, the better. And the last one's sort of an advice piece of just remembering that this too shall pass. Job searches feel very consuming and frustrating, but it will be over. And we don't want it to be over for you. And we don't want you to stop working with us until it is over. I'll highlight too here that we are free for life for alumni. We want to be working with you until you land. Students sometimes think that once they graduate, sayonara, and no, I want you to stay in touch. We want to work with you throughout that process to completion. We had one more slide to remind you of our beautiful friendly faces in the Career Center. We are here to help. Every single one of us is online available for appointments. We have the virtual ability to make appointments through Handshake, or feel free to just call or email our main line and we can set that up. We're adding resources. We already have resources on our website, I should say, that are really helpful in terms of virtual, like Career Shift, Vault, but we're also going to be adding a landing page soon summarizing a lot of these COVID-related resources. So you name it, you could probably find those resources on our website. Raven, I'll let you chime in as well with anything here at the end, and then we'll open it back up to the Q&A.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, I don't have a lot to say other than thank you for showing up. I'm again getting a note that my internet connection is unstable, just to bring it home further. But I would say just
you're cutting out now. Here's what I'll do. I'm going to read through the couple questions we've had, which it looks like we talked about attire. Good question here. Is it smart to ask a possible employer that you have interviewed with that went wrong in the interview, or would it be improved? That's a great question. So basically, we all are in our office pro asking for feedback. There will be a handful of employers that won't get back to you, or they may even have a policy to not share. They might be worried about being sued for discrimination if they say the wrong thing, whatever it might be. But I've had a lot of employers actually give really concrete feedback like, hey, we really liked you, but you didn't give very specific examples of why you were qualified, or we just didn't think you were that enthusiastic about the role compared to the other person. So you might get a nugget that is really sort of a blind spot for you that could be very, and that does show initiative. Like, you asking for feedback shows the employer you're a self-improver and someone who wants to keep improving. So feel free to ask, and I'm happy to help review a draft of that email that you might send to a recruiter as well. A great question. Abby, if you are already considering graduate school but planning on working for a few years first, would it be a good idea to start grad school sooner? Frankly, we're going to see a lot of this. In any potential or actual recession, there is absolutely a hike in the number of people that can go to graduate school for the very reason of sort of biding their time during a lower economy. I would say you could start researching that avenue while you're maybe doing some short-term work for the year, because, you know, if you hadn't applied yet, it'd probably be a year gap before starting in the following fall. But absolutely, I would say that can be one prong as a quote-unquote backup option that you could be looking into, and our office is equally equipped to kind of help with that grad school search as well.
Yes.
Anything to add there, Raven? I see you moving, so I know you're there.
I'm just a really big proponent of alternative plans and not buying in completely to one plan, like looking for graduate school, but still keeping that active job search going. And as it gets to it, if you're still not finding something you love, yes, then go apply maybe earlier than you would, but don't do it and stop searching.
Right. And yeah, we really do like to use the phrase parallel planning too. And I'm guilty of using plan A, B, and C in my vocabulary, but the way I see it, there's probably all the way through plan D or E are probably good plans for you. So working plan, you know, A, B, C, and D and E, not in that order. You never know where you're going to land. It might be C, and then you might realize that was your best plan all along. So I would look at it as a parallel planning. We have another good question, and Sophie, I've had this come up in my one-on-ones. Should you be maybe asking for less of a salary in the COVID economy, or should we give the number that we would give anyway? I don't think there's an agreed upon thought on this in the circles of career centers, but my thought would be I'm still going to be aggressive. I mean, on the front end, I'm going to ask for what I'm worth. They can always come back, and I've already seen it. I've had a few employers already tell students, hey, we're in a bad economy, sort of, you should be happy you have an offer at all mentality. That if you face that, I am going to be quicker to say maybe you accept a lower salary, but why not on the front end put out a number that you would have anyway? I don't think they're never going to back away just because you came on strong in the beginning, as long as it's within the reasonable range after having done your research. You're not going to ask for 70,000.
100% the research would support you asking for the salary you're asking for, then yes, because that's still within the range of reason. It still shows that you're a good candidate that is smart, is reasonable, does their research. But then, right, we might have to make concessions, but I would absolutely ask for what I would normally have asked for, at least initially.
I think we got almost everything there from your answer, Raven, and then you're cutting out. But yeah, absolutely, I would go forth as normal. And I did just have a student that was basically had to accept a lower pay. The employer wouldn't budge. But similar to what we would do in a normal strategy of negotiating, I coached that student on how to maybe ask for that moving or signing bonus, which hadn't been on the table. And they actually had the HR person go back and be able to have that discussion. I haven't heard what the outcome was, but they were willing to go look into it. So there's other things you can kind of do to sweeten the deal, meet them halfway, so to speak, if they're not able to budge. But certainly I think we'd be lying if we said maybe being less picky is a reality that we'll be facing in terms of the offer level and role, as long as it hits your bottom line and if you've at least tried to negotiate. We have a question about whether people actually read the summary of LinkedIn. Some people do. I think it's sort of like cover letters. For people, it's important and they'll look at it. For others, maybe not. In my mind, a summary, though, really does help employers understand what's your next logical step. For a lot of college students, their background and experience might be sort of varied and not tell a clear picture if you've had sort of random experiences for work so far. So I think a summary can help bring together your key strengths and qualities and tell them where you're headed and where your passions lie. So in case it is helpful for those that read it, I think it's incredibly valuable. Statistically, recruiters say it's an important field. I'm sure some don't read it though. I say, why not put 100, at this point especially, I would have all your ducks in a row, as we like to say, just in case. What other questions? These are all really good questions and ones we've certainly been getting from other students. And I know we're at 1 o'clock, so I understand if anyone needs to jump off, totally fine. We'll share out the link of the webinar along with the slides, but we'll hang out for a little bit if you've got other questions. Feel free to raise your hand or type those in. Some to-dos. In summary, I think our to-dos would be go review some of those resources we talked about today. If you haven't touched base with a career advisor or a trusted advisor, do that. I think personalization is really important. We could be at least 1% helpful, I always say. So feel free to reach out. What are some good websites to apply for remote internships? Perfect. I had those on one slide, but those are, I will respond to you directly, Satori, with a list that we've kind of seen coming through for internships specifically. I know we didn't hit on internships as much today.
Yes, we are going to try to email the PowerPoint. I don't have a strong understanding of whether Zoom will make readily available everyone's name. So please do not hesitate to reach out to Heather or myself. We are so happy to share these slides or the COVID document that we referenced that has a list of resources. So please just email us if in 24 hours you haven't received a link with this information.
Absolutely. All right, thank you for attending. Yeah, do feel free to reach out, and we appreciate everyone attending. Thank you for facilitating everything, Raven.
Of course, thank you for taking care of it when my Wi-Fi inevitably failed.
It's okay, we're all going through this together, which is kind of helpful, right guys? So, all right, wish you all luck and do be in touch.